watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representative Brian King and former Utah GOP Chair Derek Brown. Gentlemen, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks.
Let's get right into the 4 congressional districts here in the state of Utah. They will be going before the state Supreme Court this week on Tuesday, where they will be taking up a court case claiming gerrymandering, extreme gerrymandering, that court case claims. First off, I want to get your feel for the case. It's actually, before we get into the case, let's actually get into the districts. Let's start there first. Your thoughts on the districts. Were they split up by gerrymandering, or were they split up appropriately? Representative, let's start with you.
Well, there's no question that they were split according to what was going to be calculated to best serve Republican interests here in the state of Utah. Utah is actually a very urban state in the sense that most of the population is located along the Wasatch Front. If you were just dividing the state up according to how people vote in their elections, it would be easy to put Salt Lake County, most of Salt Lake County, in one district, and it would be a relatively favorable district for a Democrat to get elected. That isn't what happened. What we had is the state legislature back in 2021 in redistricting went through and in a very careful, very designed way, using the highest levels of technology, split up the 4 districts in a way that was calculated to enhance the likelihood that Republicans would be elected in each one of those 4 districts.
Derek, your thoughts on the districts and the way they are drawn?
Well, I think the way they're drawn makes sense, but one of the things that I think is important to remember is that ultimately, and it's, you don't want to hear it said like this, but I think the line drawing in every state is, in some instances, as judges have ruled it, it's kind of the spoils of victory, unfortunately. You know, whether you like it or not, the reality is the folks who are running the legislature also get to draw the lines. And so the arguments you hear here in Utah by Democrats about the line drawing are pretty much the same arguments that, say, the Republicans are making in states like Illinois, where they also have lawsuits. And, you know, in Illinois, for instance, you've got 17 districts in Congress, 14 of which have been drawn in such a way that a Republican has no shot of ever winning. And so you sort of see this play out across the country. And really, as much as it's uncomfortable to say, look, this is how lines were drawn, there are some hard and fast rules that the Supreme Court has said you can't cross in terms of lines, and that's not what happened. So I think the reality is this Supreme Court case will uphold what the legislature's done.
Okay, let's dig into that a little bit more and make some points on the case. Representative, let's start with you on this one. What do you make of the case that will be heard by our state Supreme Court?
Well, everyone was watching very closely a case that the Supreme Court decided just last week involving the independent state legislature's theory. And that case said you can't have the courts of a particular state second guess the gerrymandering decisions or the redistricting decisions that are made by a state legislature. It's a novel theory. It was a theory that John Eastman and others who were supporting Donald Trump's bid to overturn the 2020 election were touting and saying was a viable theory. The Supreme Court shot that down. And that was important here in Utah because it opened the door more widely and more clearly for our state Supreme Court to take a second look at what the Utah State Legislature did in 2021 in its redistricting. And I think there's some language in the Utah State Constitution that is going to form some fertile ground for the challengers to that redistricting map. We'll see, of course, and the Supreme Court is in a tough position because there are good arguments to be made on both sides on this issue. The U.S. Supreme Court has said political gerrymandering is not something that we're going to wade into, but states, individual states, have the ability to do that under the language of their own state constitutions, and that's what we're facing here in Utah, is a challenge to that redistricting map based on our state constitution.
Okay, Derek, you already mentioned that you believe the court will side with the legislature. Talk about why.
Well, as Representative King mentioned, there is some language in the Constitution that could prove problematic, but ultimately, I mean, there was also a Supreme Court decision that reinforced the fact that you can't, when you draw lines, you can't do things like dilute the voting strength of individuals based on race. And there's some other things like that. And I think if you look at what it is the Supreme Court has said, our legislature here in Utah didn't do that. And so, I mean, the reality is line drawing is uncomfortable, and, you know, it's not a, in terms of the sausage making process of of laws. I mean, it really is the quintessential sausage, but at the same time, you know, someone's got to draw the lines. And so as long as you don't run afoul of what it is the Supreme Court has said you can't in terms of some of those hard and fast rules, the lines won't be overturned. And so I think it's highly unlikely they'll be overturned. But there will be some strong arguments. I've read through the pleadings, and they certainly reference some of that language that Representative King mentions in the Constitution.
Okay, let's get to the United States Supreme Court now. We have seen a lot of rulings coming down this term, and a lot of them causing a lot of controversy and a lot of firestorm across our country. Rulings on race when it comes to college admissions, whether or not businesses can impose service to same-sex couples, and the President Biden loan forgiveness program, just to name a few, in the last couple of days. Derek, let's start with you. First off, how do you assess what you're seeing come out of the nation's highest court?
Well, I think the bottom line is this is something that, you know, like it or not, President Trump did say that he would do if he was president. He would appoint justices to the court that were on the right side of the political spectrum. And in fact, that's what he did. And so you're going to see, I think, these kind of impacts are, I mean, they're going to be massive in terms of sort of the implications here in America, things like affirmative action or student loan forgiveness or the free speech issues. I mean, you're going to see the implications of that, but I think you are going to see that impact in the 2024 race, because you're already starting to see, at least in the Republican Party, a lot of the candidates that have, you know, weighed in one way or the other, most of them weighing in favor. And since President Trump is very good at taking credit for that which he does, and sometimes even that which he doesn't do, I think you will at some point see him use this as a major campaign sort of tool, where he basically says, look, I agreed to do this, and whether you like me or not, I did exactly what I said I was going to do. So I think we'll see this as a major issue in the 2024 race.
We'll get more into that in just a second, but Representative, let's hear from you, your assessment on what you're seeing from the nation's highest court.
We're seeing more political and policy making from the U.S. Supreme Court than we've ever seen. This is a court that is intent on bringing to pass its personal and the ideological and partisan and political preferences of the members of the court more than we've seen. We've seen that with the abortion decision from last term. We saw it with striking down affirmative action this year. We saw it with the striking down of the student loan forgiveness programs from President Biden. I think that people are going to recognize, as Derek said, this is a campaign issue. Who we elect as president is critically important to who ends up on the U.S. Supreme Court. And one of the things that's been most troubling to me, quite honestly, Glenn, is information that has come to light which demonstrates that some of the members of the U.S. Supreme Court are taking luxury trips without disclosing it, without recusing themselves from the cases, without not sitting on the cases, and yet the very individuals who were paying for those trips are bringing cases later before the Supreme Court and arguing those cases where they have financial interests at risk there. And that's not something that the United States can afford to put up with. We need to have full disclosure of when there is a financial interest or a conflict of interest on the part of the Supreme Court justices, and we need to get to the bottom of it in terms of congressional investigations of those kinds of conflicts of interest.
Okay, we have about a minute left. Let's talk more about the impact on 2024. The president has come out and said, you know, we need this to fire up our base on the left. So if this does indeed fire up the left, what would be the Republican strategy going into 2024 based off these rulings, Derek?
Well, I think you're going to see most of the candidates for the Republican Party basically wrapping their arms around these decisions and saying, we agree with these, you know, and essentially saying, if I am president, I will nominate for the court individuals like Justice Kavanaugh or Justice Gorsuch or Amy Coney Barrett. I mean, those are the kinds of things you're going to see them say in one form or another. In fact, this last week, we've seen a lot of them. Mike Pence, Nikki Haley have already started talking about these cases. And I think you're going to see a lot more of it between now and the end of next year.
Okay, we have about 30 seconds left. Representative, how do you see this impacting 2024?
I welcome this discussion. I'm very glad that we're talking about these issues because the Supreme Court is out of touch with working Americans. They're out of touch with the needs of regular Utahns and regular people across this country. I don't want the government stepping into the most private personal decisions I make in my life, with my family, with my spouse, about such things as reproductive freedoms. We believe in freedom. We believe in liberty. This is the kind of stuff that should be left to people to decide, as opposed to having the state legislature step in and dictate.
All right, gentlemen, appreciate the insight. Incredible conversation. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.